and when you feel as if you'd like to play something a little bit scary.
They opened Fred Rogers' locked drawer on a rainy afternoon in Pittsburgh, expecting nothing more than old envelopes tied with ribbon. But what lay within was far from the gentle wisdom the world had come to know. As the lid creaked open, dozens of yellowed sheets fell out, each one ink-stained with questions, doubts, and confessions. Some bore dates meticulously penned in the margin, March 20th, June 5th, November 10th, and every single one carried a haunting undercurrent, a letter to God from the man who spent his life teaching children about kindness and hope. The discovery of these hidden messages sent shockwaves through his family and anyone who ever believed they knew his full story. Even decades after his death, Fred Rogers still held secrets that refused to stay buried. For over 30 years, Fred Rogers welcomed every viewer into his neighborhood with soft melodies and soft-spoken wisdom. The world saw a man in a red cardigan, a kind voice that never rushed, and a reassuring presence as dependable as sunrise. He spoke of feelings, anger, and love, as if he held a private key to every child's heart. Yet, beyond the television screen and behind the carefully curated sets, he engaged in a silent ritual. Every year, on the anniversary of his birth, Fred penned a letter to God, pouring out questions that would baffle anyone who assumed he never doubted his own purpose. In one letter, he wondered if his work truly made a difference, if each hour spent scripting gentle lessons was enough to heal aching souls. In another, he confessed to sleepless nights, haunted by memories of childhood that he never shared on air. Taken together, these letters paint a portrait of a man grappling with his legacy, desperate to understand whether love alone could stand against the world's pain. And the letters were far from the only revelations that emerged. Buried beneath the faded ribbons, researchers found fragments of a manuscript so raw and unfiltered that almost no publisher dared to touch it. Written in 1986, it stripped away the familiar sweater and soft-spoken assurance, revealing a voice that carried anger, regret, and the weight of lifelong trauma. The pages spoke of nights spent clawing at loneliness, of the train wreck he witnessed as a child, and of the developmental challenges that left him isolated. These confessions were never intended for public eyes. Fred begged his wife to lock them away until he no longer walked the earth. Yet today, those pleas echo with a chilling irony. The man who taught millions of children to face fear and pain with courage couldn't face his own uncertainties in the light. Imagine hearing for the first time that Mr. Rogers, the gentle mentor, the safe space for vulnerable hearts, once wrestled with his own self-worth in whispers to the sky. Those letters don't simply reveal a hidden facet, they shatter the myth of unwavering certainty. They challenge the notion that kindness is born of calm, instead suggesting it may be forged in the crucible of personal doubt. Each page forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about him, the unwavering confidence, the timeless assurances, and the serene calm behind his signature crimson sweater. He was not a paragon of unshakable faith or flawless composure. He was a man learning to forgive himself, one private confession at a time. Even now, decades later, the contents of that drawer spark debates among scholars, clergy, and psychologists. Some say the letters represent a master strategist at work. By sharing his vulnerable questioning posthumously, Fred preserved his reputation while letting us witness the true cost of compassion. Others argue they reveal the raw truth. A lifetime dedicated to service can consume you, leaving behind a torrent of unresolved fears. Yet, regardless of the interpretation, there is an undeniable truth emerging from the dusty papers. Mr. Rogers was more like us than any of us dared imagine. Behind the calm, he wrestled with questions of faith, purpose, and worth, questions as old as humanity itself. What he hid beneath polished episodes and familiar tunes was a blueprint for genuine character, the acknowledgement that vulnerability can coexist with wisdom, and that every act of kindness requires its own act of courage. As we prepare to delve deeper into his story, we will trace the origins of these hidden letters back to a boy alone in a grand Pennsylvania mansion, to a young man haunted by illness and ridicule, and to an artist determined to break through the noise of a world hungry for spectacle. Only by understanding the full weight of his private doubts can we truly appreciate the depth of the hope he offered. The mansion on Cherry Hill Drive was nothing short of opulent, 47 acres of rolling lawns, heated floors in marble halls, and a private elevator connecting story after grand story. Yet for 2-year-old Fred Rogers, the estate felt less like a playground, and more like a prison of silence. His father James spent dawn to dusk at the steel mill, forging iron for the nation, while his mother Nancy managed family affairs from a distance. 3 servants roamed the corridors, but they could never replace the sound of a parent's laughter. Instead, the halls echoed with Fred's own voice, soft, inquisitive, and isolated. It was here, among chandeliers and sunlit foyers, that the boy first learned that loneliness could settle like dust, invisible until you tried to breathe. At age 2, during the darkest days of the Great Depression, Fred contracted both measles and scarlet fever. In a hospital bed that cost more than many families earned in a year, he lay feverish for 47 days. Doctors recorded that 15% of children who endured both illnesses did not survive. When his temperature spiked past 104 degrees, he hallucinated voices and shadows, convinced that unseen figures danced at the foot of his bed. Through every delirious night, his mother sat vigil. She taught him to play melodies on the black keys of the piano, a gift to keep his frail fingers moving when the whites felt too fragile. To Fred, each black key became a voice, a friend, a heartbeat in the darkness. The piano was no longer an instrument, it was a lifeline. By 3, Fred's hands remained clumsy. He couldn't tie his shoes, struggled with forks and crayons, and the simplest tasks became mountains to climb. Doctors diagnosed him with developmental dyspraxia and grimly suggested institutionalizing him. But James and Nancy refused. They hired Margaret Thompson, a physical therapist with a flair for creativity. Margaret arrived one morning carrying handmade puppets. She placed them in Fred's hands and wove stories he couldn't resist. As he manipulated the strings and voices, his muscles loosened, his confidence grew, and within 6 months his dexterity improved by a staggering 300%. His shoes stayed Velcro until he was 12, but Fred never forgot how play could heal a mind battered by doubt. He emerged from therapy not just with skill, but with the first spark of purpose to create worlds where compassion could overcome any limitation. The same year, tragedy struck again. A freight train derailed less than 500 yards from the mansion, killing 47 passengers in an instant. Young Fred peered from his bedroom window, watching twisted rails and the flicker of flames, absorbing the horror in silent shock. His father told him the victims were just sleeping, but Fred, in hushed tones of childhood innocence, pressed his mother, "Why do people get hurt when they're just trying to go somewhere?" That question pierced him deeper than any fever. It became a seed planted in the very core of his soul, a yearning to find answers for the suffering he couldn't fathom. In the attic, surrounded by dust and discarded furniture, Fred built his first stage. Using old socks and scrap wood, he fashioned puppets and gave them voices and stories. His audience consisted of an audience of one, a single row of stuffed animals perched on a battered wooden bench. Each afternoon he orchestrated dramas of bravery and kindness, rehearsals that lasted for hours. One day, his mother climbed the narrow stairs and discovered him mid-performance, commanding his sock puppets with a grace that defied his small frame. Moved by the depth of his imagination, she commissioned a real puppet theater, complete with red velvet curtains, footlights, and a hand-painted backdrop. Fred named his favorite character David the Dreamer, a shy puppet who dared to speak up for others. The themes of fear, kindness, and belonging he explored then would later underscore every episode of his famous television show. Religion, too, wove its way into Fred's early life. Baptized at 6, he received handmade Bible story sets crafted by his grandmother, each piece painstakingly cut from felt. She challenged him with tough questions. "Why does a good God let children suffer?" she would ask. Without flinching, she replied, "God wants us to wonder." Their weekly conversations became a sacred tradition, teaching Fred that doubt need not erode faith but could deepen it. He learned that asking questions was an act of reverence, not rebellion. These lessons stayed with him long after he replaced puppet shows with live broadcasts, guiding the gentle cadence of his voice and the careful pacing of his words. He never pretended to have all the answers, but he always showed he cared enough to ask. By the time he reached high school, Fred's perseverance bore fruit in unexpected ways. despite relentless bullying for his height, high pitch, and lingering awkwardness, he navigated each hall with quiet dignity, finding solace in music and small acts of compassion. He composed complex pieces that bewildered his classmates, a string quartet movement, so intricate it earned astonishment from teachers and derision from peers who labeled it funeral music. Yet Fred pressed on, driven by the belief that creativity and kindness could outlive cruelty. His school days, marked by isolation and triumph, laid the groundwork for the gentle mentor the world would eventually embrace. Every note he wrote, every kind word he offered, was forged in the crucible of a lonely boy's search for connection, an odyssey that had only just begun. College opened new worlds for Fred, both liberating and terrifying. In 1948, at just 20 years old, he left Pennsylvania's chill behind and boarded a train south to Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. Under palms and cloudless skies, he immersed himself equally in music theory and theology. Mornings found him at choir rehearsals, afternoons composing string quartets in the practice rooms, and evenings debating scripture by lamplight. Yet beneath the warmth, he carried the same ache for connection that had shadowed his childhood. He smoothed the red wool of his favorite cardigan, as if it were a shield against loneliness, quietly determined to translate solitude into something life-giving. Fred's academic record sparkled. By spring 1951, he graduated magna cum laude in music, with a minor in sociology, an unusual mix, but one that reflected his lifelong quest to understand both melody and humanity. Professors lauded his uncanny ear. He could hear a tune once and replay it, note for note. His classmates admired how he led recitals with a gentle precision that seemed to coax emotion from every phrase. Still, outside the recital hall he remained reserved, preferring late-night piano sessions in empty practice rooms to big campus dances. There, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, he experimented with chord progressions, tension-filled suspensions for fear, warm resolutions for belonging, dissonant intervals for anger, building an emotional lexicon he would later speak on television. After college, Fred journeyed north to New York City and enrolled at the Union Theological Seminary. The city's roar contrasted sharply with Rollins' tranquility. He traded palm trees for subways, skyscrapers, and the hum of a million restless souls. His days began in classrooms dissecting ethics and exegesis. His nights ended in smoky jazz clubs on 52nd Street. Playing piano for $5 a set funded his rent and immersed him in syncopated rhythms that would later infuse the melodies of his children's show. He never advertised these secret gigs. His theological peers would have frowned, but he carried every riff and improvisation forward, weaving complexity into simplicity. Parallel to seminary, Fred plunged into television. In 1951, he landed a behind-the-scenes role at NBC. Backstage, he found slapstick sketches, pie fights, and an emphasis on cheap laughs. During a rehearsal, he watched grown adults hurl pies at each other while children in the audience cackled. A knot formed in his chest. 6 weeks later, he drafted his resignation. He refused to equate spectacle with substance. His departure sent a clear message: children deserve honesty and respect, not mockery in the name of entertainment. That conviction would become the cornerstone of his lifelong mission to build a neighborhood where vulnerability met understanding. In 1953, Fred returned to Florida to marry Joanne, the classmate who had become his confidant. Their wedding was modest but filled with warmth. A handwritten proposal slipped under her door at midnight, magnolia blossoms framing their promise. Joanne became the quiet engine behind his work, typing scripts, cataloging music, and holding down the home front so Fred could focus on his calling. Their 50-year marriage would prove the bedrock of his personal and professional life. By 1954, Fred relocated to Pittsburgh for a pioneering opportunity at WQED, one of America's first community-funded television stations. With a budget of only $150 a week, he co-created the Children's Corner. Together with co-host Josie Carey, he wrote every script, engineered simple sets, and breathed life into homemade puppets. Daniel Tiger emerged from a hand-sewn sock, Lady Elaine Fairchild from discarded fabric painted in bold colors. Fred operated them all: puppets, organ, and improvised trolley, while darting back and forth in his trademark sneakers. When critics doubted his vision, he stood firm. Kindness and curiosity were non-negotiable. The local success of the Children's Corner emboldened Fred. By 1955, he introduced the iconic red trolley, a tiny handmade model that traversed a miniature track built from scrap wood and ingenuity. Episodes invited children to mail questions about fear, anger, and sadness. Fred read each letter on camera, answering not with platitudes but thoughtful reflection. His studies in theology surfaced naturally. He acknowledged uncertainty, reminded viewers that feelings mattered, and showed that questions could be more valuable than answers. Yet skepticism persisted. In 1960, Variety dismissed his work as tedious therapy, and some stations cut back airtime. Viewership dipped compared to glitzy network fare, but Fred refused to chase ratings. He spent late nights analyzing viewer feedback, refining each segment based on genuine need. He typed and retyped every word, rewrote every musical cue, and rehearsed until sincerity shone through the camera lens. That discipline paved the way for what would become Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, a show built on trust, not gimmicks. During these formative years, Fred's ordination as a Presbyterian minister in 1963 remained largely behind the scenes. He was not at the pulpit, but in the studio. He practiced a different kind of ministry, one that spoke directly to a child's heart. His theological training equipped him to navigate tough topics, divorce, war, death, with sensitivity and authenticity. He cultivated a tone that was both confessional and hopeful, never shying away from pain, yet always pointing toward healing. In this period of transitions, seminary to studio, student to minister, reserved young man to national mentor, Fred forged his signature approach: slow pacing, clear enunciation, gentle eye contact through the lens, and music composed to mirror every emotional turn. He learned that depth thrived in simplicity, that children would follow if you spoke plainly, and that vulnerability need not weaken a message, but could magnify its power. By embracing his own doubts, he discovered the courage to guide others through their fears. These years solidified the blueprint for his legacy: unwavering respect for children's inner worlds, an unshakable commitment to authenticity, and a belief that love, even in its humblest forms, could rewrite stories of loneliness. As we prepare to explore the trials and triumphs that followed, the national rollout of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the Senate testimony that saved PBS funding, and the hidden manuscript that publishers deemed too raw, you'll see how every note he composed, every puppet he animated, and every hesitant prayer he wrote to God in secret letters, were intertwined chapters of a life dedicated to service, compassion, and the relentless pursuit of honest connection. In 1968, Fred returned to American television with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood after nearly 900 episodes on Canadian airwaves. The transformation was subtle, but profound. The trolley became a passport to a make-believe world, and his sweater, hand-knitted by his mother, became a symbol of trust. He painted each segment with deliberate slowness, inviting children to feel seen rather than rushed. Cameras lingered on his thoughtful expressions. He moved at a pace adults found glacial, but which allowed young minds to absorb, reflect, and connect. His opening song, simple yet earnest, became a ritual moment of calm that challenged the frenetic energy of rival cartoons. Pushback followed almost immediately. Critics accused him of boring therapy and questioned whether a man who spoke so softly could hold attention in an era of flashing animation and raucous theme songs. One station cut his airtime, another considered swapping him for game shows. Advertisers grumbled that kids would never sit through a program devoid of commercials for sugary toys. But Fred refused to budge. He held fast to a conviction born of early trauma: children deserved a sanctuary where vulnerability was honored, not exploited. He rewrote his scripts, rather than dilute them, trusting that authenticity would find its audience. His defining moment came in 1969, when PBS funding hung in the balance. Senators debated cuts that threatened to silence public broadcasting altogether. Fred, ordained but rarely preaching from pulpits, brought a song instead of statistics. He spoke quietly about his $28,000 salary, contrasted it with the six-figure paychecks of executives, and then performed a short melody on his treasured piano. The chamber fell silent. Senator John Pastore leaned forward and asked, "Is this all you want?" Fred nodded. Pastore's next words secured $20 million in funding. In 5 minutes, a gentle voice saved a national institution. Behind the scenes, Fred maintained athletic discipline few suspected. Diagnosed with mild hypertension in 1971, he rose at 5:30 a.m. to swim 3 miles, bench press 200 pounds, and finished 100 push-ups before breakfast, all to keep his public persona consistent. He feared that any hint of strength might overshadow his message of humility, so he hid his physique under cardigans and loose pants. This secret regimen, born of respect for his audience's expectations, exemplified his belief in servanthood. He would bear burdens privately, so children could focus on feelings, not facades. Social change seeped into his scripts. In 1969, a year after Martin Luther King's assassination, Fred invited Officer Clemens, a black cast member, to cool his feet alongside him in a small wading pool. Southern stations balked, angry letters flooded in. But instead of retreating, Fred responded personally to each critic, calmly reaffirming that kindness knows no color. He never lectured, he simply demonstrated care. That single scene became a landmark in children's TV history, showing that the values he preached could, and must, transcend societal divisions. War and conflict weighed heavily on his heart. In 1972, he produced a 5-part series called Conflict, where King Friday built fences and discussed threats. Parents branded it un-American, but Fred insisted children needed truthful, age-appropriate conversations about violence. When major networks refused, he mailed each episode to local stations himself. His theology taught that honesty and empathy could guide young hearts through fear. Even as critics roared, letters poured in from parents grateful for the clarity and solace the series offered. By the mid-1970s, Fred had written over 200 songs for his show, composed 13 operas, and answered every viewer letter by hand. He cataloged each missive, filed them by topic, and spent evenings praying for the children named within. Yet he harbored doubts. Publishers balked at his 1986 manuscript, The World of Mr. Rogers, calling it too raw. It revealed scars on his face from teenage acne, moments when he purposely wiped off makeup on camera to show imperfection, and confessions about the emotional toll of bearing others' pain. He pleaded with his wife Joanne to lock it away. He feared the world wasn't ready to see his armor stripped. Throughout these years, Fred's strength lay in contrast framing, pairing serene visuals with honest discussions of grief, blending a childlike set with adult questions about purpose, juxtaposing his measured pace against the hurried world outside. His transitions, sliding from a playful puppet skit into a direct address about anger, felt seamless, a testament to his mastery of emotional rhythm. Each episode followed a 4-step arc: a gentle greeting, a moment of conflict or question, guided exploration, and a reassuring farewell. Within that structure, he wove smooth transitions that eased children through uncertainty into safety. Above all, Fred's greatest revelation remained locked in that drawer: his annual letters to God, each a testament to persistent self-doubt disguised as prayer. As we approach 1986 and unveil the full extent of those writings, remember that the gentlest voices can harbor the deepest tremors of fear. His life was a tapestry of hope spun from threads of personal struggle, each confession a bridge between his private angst and public ministry. In these revelations, we find the true measure of his courage, not in a plea for applause, but in the willingness to question and to grow, even when no one watched. By the mid-1980s, Fred Rogers faced a turning point unlike any before. He had spent 3 decades inviting children into his neighborhood, building trust day by day. But behind the camera, his doubts deepened. In 1986, he drafted The World of Mr. Rogers, a brutally honest manuscript meant to accompany his gentle broadcasts. He described the teenage insecurities that drove him to smother acne scars with heavy makeup, the nights he cried alone after reading letters from frightened children, and the secret anxiety that stalked him during show tapings. Each page pulsed with vulnerability, confessions of rage barely contained, of grief he refused to let his young viewers glimpse, and of a man so afraid of disappointment that he begged his wife to lock the pages away until after he died. When publishers read the draft, they recoiled. The tone was too naked, the revelations too raw. Fred tucked the manuscript into a drawer, convinced the world was not ready for his unvarnished truth. Yet those private pages were only the beginning. In the fall of 1998, at age 70, he received life-altering news: stomach cancer. The doctors advised rest, but Fred did the opposite. He returned to the studio, determined to finish the stories he had promised. Between chemotherapy sessions, he taped 65 new episodes. Crew members recall how he would slip off camera during breaks, pale and aching, then return moments later, buckle his cardigan, and smile at the camera, as if nothing were wrong. He lost 40 pounds, yet padded his sweaters so children would never see his frailty. Instead of hiding his illness outright, he wove it into the neighborhood. Daniel Tiger developed an upset stomach. He asked questions that mirrored Fred's own fears. In those moments, the neighborhood became a living metaphor, a space where pain could be named, explored and walked through with compassion.